Hello and a warm welcome to the Baillie Gifford Prize for Non-Fiction 2020. This is the moment when we announce this year's winner in an event generously sponsored by the Blavatnik Family Foundation. Instead of our normal venue at the Science Museum, we're bringing all the participants together digitally this year from across the UK and indeed from across the world. Tonight you'll hear from our sponsors, Baillie Gifford. You'll hear from our judges, Shahid Abari, Simon Ings, Leo Robson, Max Strasser, B. Wilson, and their chair, Martha Kearney. They've selected a compelling shortlist of 6 books covering brain science, the occult in the 1930s, the history of a black leader in a time of slavery, an intimate history of a woman in feudal 19th century Japan, a searing chronicle of rape as a weapon of modern warfare, and an innovative experimental biography of the Beatles. Now don't tell us we're not a broad church. And this autumn, when publishers who delayed multiple publications during our COVID summer deluged us with titles, more than ever, the role of the Baillie Gifford is to help all of us find the brilliant reads amongst all that choice. Not long to go before we reveal our winner, but first, please welcome Charles Plowden, Senior Partner at Baillie Gifford.
Good evening, everyone. I'm speaking to you today from the library in Baillie Gifford's Edinburgh headquarters, an apposite location to welcome you all to this year's award of the Baillie Gifford Prize for Non-Fiction. Like many of you, I'm desperately disappointed that we can't be together in person, enjoying what is one of my favourite occasions. But the upside, and there is always an upside, is that tonight's award is open to far more attendees than usual. Like so many of our book festivals, necessity has driven invention and democratised engagement beyond the lucky few. We at Baillie Gifford continue to be delighted with our involvement with the prize, which certainly seems to be going from strength to strength, both in terms of the prestige and quality of the long and short lists, but also in terms of profile, particularly and increasingly internationally. This year we supported events at both the Brooklyn and the Jaipur book festivals, the latter a first for us. It was always our hope that this could become internationally recognised as the non-fiction prize globally, and I think we're well on the way. We've committed to continue our support until at least 2025, and I fully expect it to continue well beyond that, though I personally won't be involved as I'm retiring next year. Recent years have confirmed our view that successfully navigating financial markets and what we call actual investing depend not on the popular perception of spreadsheets and high-speed trading, but rather on insightful, thoughtful research which can help spot the big trends that drive society and create the future. We strongly believe that such insights often come from listening to and learning from a wide range of experts and authorities. For this reason, we have a well-stocked library, and we encourage our staff to read widely and to engage with authors wherever they can track them down. I very much hope, God willing, that all 6 shortlisted authors will next year be able to visit us in Edinburgh, the world's first city of literature and home of one of the world's best book festivals. I can promise you a warm and engaged reception. Thank you to the board of the prize and to Toby Mundy, the prize director, and all who have worked to make it such a success, especially under such very trying circumstances. And lastly, congratulations to all the shortlisted authors. Thank you for all the years of research and hard work which went into your books, and the best of luck to you all. Not long to wait now.
Thanks very much, Charles. Now it's time to hear from the chair of our judges, Martha Kearney. She and colleagues will tell you more about the shortlist, in strictly alphabetical order, so no clues there. And finally, she'll say more about judging in a time of the COVID lockdown. And finally, she'll reveal this year's winner of the Baillie Gifford. Martha, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Well, this isn't quite the ceremony that I'd imagined, with posh frocks, glasses of champagne, grand surroundings. Instead, I'm well wrapped up here at home with a cup of tea, and Chris, my husband, is filming this on his phone. Thank you for that. I suppose that's 2020 for you. But what this year has really brought for me, and I think for lots of people, is an understanding of the joy of reading. And I really would recommend that you take a look at our wonderful shortlist if you haven't had a chance to already. So here are 6 of the best, and we're going to begin in alphabetical order. First of all with 1, 2, 3, 4 by Craig Brown, which is an unbelievably fresh take of the Fab Four, in which he really reinvents the art of biography.
1, 2, 3, 4. In their neat black suits and ties, Brian Epstein and his personal assistant, Alistair Taylor, make their way down the 18 steep steps into the sweaty basement on Matthew Street. Brian finds it, he says, as black as a deep grave, dank and damp and smelly. He wishes he hadn't come. Both he and Taylor would prefer to be attending a classical concert at the Philharmonic, but curiosity got the better of them. I think the story of the Beatles is one of the great kind of 20th century stories. So almost like a novel. First, you get the story of these 4 working class boys from Liverpool becoming, in the space of a few years, the most famous 4 people in the world, just about.
The amazing thing about this book is I've recommended it to loads of people, and sometimes they say, what is there that's new to tell us about the Beatles? But it's somehow one of the freshest books I've ever read, and it makes you see them through a completely different lens. And part of that story is all of these wonderful counterfactuals. So he makes you see, if Ringo hadn't been ill as a child, if Paul had passed his Latin exam, if John's mum hadn't died. Lots of these little moments, well, they weren't so little, but the Beatles would never have happened. So it's a kind of magical book that makes you see so many factors had to come together in order for the Beatles to become what they did. It's funny, it's sad, it's fresh. It's everything that I want from a non-fiction book. It's comforting, it's informative. It just takes you on all these different little journeys. So he's not just writing about the Beatles. He somehow sees that in order to tell the full story of the Beatles, you also need to see they impacted all of these other people around the world, the people that hated them, the people that loved them, the time they met the Queen, the fact that Charles Manson was interested in them. It's an extraordinary book, and nobody other than Craig Brown could have written it.
Next on our list, Matthew Cobb's Mind Expanding the Idea of the Brain, which took us on a fascinating journey through the history of brain science.
Once upon a time, there was a brilliant but rather odd boy called Walter, who lived in Detroit. Walter's working class family thought he was a freak, as did other children. In 1935, aged 12, Walter fled into a public library to escape some bullies. Safely inside, he found himself in front of a copy of Principia Mathematica, a 3-volume work of fearsome mathematical logic written by Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead. I think it will surprise, challenge and enthrall, I hope, the reader, showing that many of the things that they thought they knew turned out not to be true. So the book is full of questions. There are some answers. The 4 most important words in science are "we do not know." And that's what I've tried to bring out, the gaps in our knowledge.
Rarely do I come upon a book that takes that huge body of knowledge and opinion and hype and distill it into a single volume that takes us back to zero and says, this is what we actually know. These are the questions that are worth asking. These are the scientific sounding statements that actually aren't that scientific. These are the rational statements that actually aren't that rational, and exposes an entire tradition, or multiple traditions in fact, to real intellectual analysis.
Now, Sudhir Hazareesingh, the fascinating story of a political pioneer based on some phenomenal research.
Toussaint's local political style was most strikingly on display in his stronghold of Gonaives, from which he had expelled the Spaniards. He rebuilt the town completely, paving its principal streets, widening its canal, and embellishing its main buildings. After the departure of Governor Lavaux in 1796, Toussaint turned the Gonaives district into a more or less independent enclave under his political and military command. Toussaint Louverture was born in the French colony of Saint-Domingue, which in today's terms is the state of Haiti. He was born from enslaved parents who were forcibly transported to Saint-Domingue in the first half of the 18th century, and he became the leader of the largest and the most successful revolt of enslaved people.
The reader can expect to be taken on so many journeys while reading Black Spartacus. Actually, that's kind of what's great about the book in a way. It's a journey that takes you from enslavement to liberation to prison, right? So it's sort of like this trajectory of a human's experience. You can be taken on a journey through the birth of a new country. You're taken on a journey through the formation of a new state. You're taken on a journey through the ideas that were sort of animating Haiti during the revolutionary period. You're taken on a journey through a series of battles. I mean, it's really a book, as you follow Toussaint's life, that takes you on so many different journeys along the way.
Hear now about Christina Lamb's incredibly important book, Our Bodies, Their Battlefield. Powerful eyewitness testimony of women and girls raped in war.
As I pushed open the black metal gate in a suburban street of northern Manila and entered a small house, inside a stray marmalade cat wandered through, arching its tail into a question mark, and two little old ladies met and embraced. They discussed their health, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the journey there to Quezon City in the capital's notorious traffic, nothing out of the ordinary. They were there, however, because they shared a most terrible bond. I have to say that in the last few years, I have seen far more brutality against women and girls, really unimaginable things on a very wide scale, than I had seen in the whole of the rest of my career as a journalist. So I started looking into it, not really with the aim of writing a book at the beginning, just trying to understand what was happening and what could be done about it.
This is such a powerful book that I think it would be impossible to ignore, and I think all the judges felt the same way, that this was bringing to light some terrible abuses that have happened throughout the world, throughout history. And Christina Lamb also casts insight into why it's happened. She even talks to a former ISIS fighter who was suspected of carrying out some of this violence in an effort to try and discover why it has been so widespread. And now to a book described by one of our judges as a captivating jewel box. That's Amy Stanley's Stranger in a Shogun City. It's a moving story of 19th century Japan about the kind of life that's all too often overlooked by history.
All through the rest of 1838 and into 1839, Tsuneno was desperate. She had never recovered from the illness she suffered in Takata, and her ailment seemed psychological as well as physical. She wrote later that she had intended to die. Giyu attributed her suffering to her personal failings. She was married, but the marriage failed due to her selfishness, and soon after she was divorced, her health deteriorated. What I really wanted was for the reader to have a sense of what it felt like to live in 19th century Japan. And I mean that very literally, to kind of feel the cold that seeps through the walls in the snow country, or to smell the scent of the wood fire in the hearth, So it's that kind of experience of immersion in a different time and place that I'm hoping that the reader gets out of this book.
Amy Stanley's book, Stranger in the Shogun City, is a really transformative read. That's what happens when you read this book. It will take you into an entirely strange and particular world in 19th century Japan, and it will also transform you. That's the remarkable thing about this book. So it's about a young woman growing up in a Buddhist family in Japan in the 19th century, and her family are tasked with the care of a temple. And so what that means is they have enormous records and documents about their life. And so Amy Stanley seems to have gathered and marshaled all this material and managed to reconstruct this woman's world. She is an ordinary woman in so many ways, but like all ordinary women, she is also extraordinary. And the story follows her various marriages. She marries 4 times, including to a samurai. And it's about her efforts to forge her own life. And she leaves the temple to go to a new burgeoning city called Edo.
And finally, Kate Summerscale's The Haunting of Alma Fielding, a thrilling read about 1930s poltergeists in an era of political turbulence.
Fodor, a Jewish-Hungarian journalist, had for 4 years been chief ghost hunter at the International Institute for Psychical Research. He loved his job, which required him to investigate and verify weird events. But the spiritualist press had recently turned against him. The best-selling weekly Psychic News accused him of being cynical about the supernatural and unkind to mediums, charges that were so damaging to his reputation as a psychical researcher and his future in London that in January he had sued for libel. I read about the story in the book by Nandor Fodor he published in the 50s. He was the ghost hunter who investigated it. I felt the eeriness of the story because these were people who were then living witnesses to supernatural events.
One of the things about Kate Summerscale as a writer, and it's particularly evident in The Haunting of Alma Fielding, is she's not a showy writer. She's not trying to pull off exciting effects all the time. And yet the dexterity required of her, specifically as a prose writer and as evoker of atmosphere and creator of character, in order to put all these strands together, is just remarkable. So I think the thing that really stands out about this book, which people most enjoy, is just the virtuosity of someone who now, after 5 books, is just a complete, master of what she does.
That was our shortlist, and there really were some wonderful books there. And I should express my thanks to my fellow judges, to Shahid Abari, to Simon Ings, Leah Robson, Max Strasser and B. Wilson for their intelligent insights and unbelievable good humour throughout the hard work of judging. And I think what we discovered was the unbelievable nature of non-fiction at the moment, both the sheer quality of the writing, but also the originality that so many people are bringing to the form. And that is one of the criteria, of course, for our prize, that originality. It's a literary prize above all, looking at the quality of the writing. So who's won? Well, we picked a book that was like a shaft of light piercing the deep gloom of 2020. A book which surprised us as well as its originality and pathos as humour too. It's a profound book about the nature of success and failure, illuminated with telling detail, a collage of a book with more characters than you can see on the album cover of Sgt. Pepper's. Who would have thought that a book about the Beatles could seem so fresh? Well, we're talking about our winner being, of course, 1, 2, 3, 4 by Craig Brown. I should say that it was the unanimous choice of all the judges, which I have to say in my judging experience is pretty unusual. There was no blood on the walls, just the echo of laughter around the Zoom call. So I'd like to offer my congratulations and that of all the judges to Craig Brown for his ability to reinvent the form of the biography, and also our heartfelt thanks for cheering us all up.
Hello there. As you may know, I'm chair of the Baillie Gifford Prize this year, 2020, and I'm absolutely delighted to be able to say that you have won it, and you are the unanimous choice of all our judges, so many congratulations.
Oh my God. Well, this is amazingly exciting and unexpected. I'm very, very happy. I would like to pay tribute to my fellow authors who've gone through this ordeal. We've all gone in our separate ways through this ordeal. I'd also like to thank my publishers, brilliant publishers, Fourth Estate, especially Nicholas Pearson, Robert Lacey, and Naomi Mantin, for being so friendly and enthusiastic and giving the book such a good cover, apart from everything else. And also, I hope I can speak on behalf of my fellow shortlistees and longlistees in paying tribute to a great non-fiction writer who died last week and gave me sort of pleasure throughout my life, at least for the last 50 years, and that's Jan Morris, a most brilliant writer, and so we're lucky to have had her.
Well, many congratulations, Craig, and you end your speech with a typically generous gesture. Congratulations.
This is not just a biography of 4 halfway talented musicians who together became the most extraordinary band in the history of popular music. It is that. It's also about the catastrophe of success. It's about how lives were changed, sometimes for the better, but in totally unexpected and unnerving directions. How other lives were wrecked through nobody's fault and through nobody's intention, but just because of the mechanics of how the Beatles developed and how their celebrity evolved. In consequence, this becomes quite a profound book about everything that we have lost during the current pandemic. It becomes about what it is like to be in this social fluid, where everyone's communications and miscommunications throw up unexpected life events, life-changing events as well. So this is much more than a biography about 4 people.
So I think 1, 2, 3, 4 is a really worthy winner and the right winner for this year, because it's been such an unusual year. It's been a difficult year, a sad year for many of us, but it's also been oddly a chance to remember what reading is for. And this is such a profoundly joyful book. It's so sharply witty and affectionate and driven by enthusiasm, by deep love for this band, that it reminds you what's so great about reading. And I think this is a really good year to have that reminder.
I would say this is a book not for Beatles fans. I do not consider myself a Beatles fan. When I saw this on the list, when I had to pick this up, I will be completely honest, I approached it with a small amount of dread. I am not very interested in the Beatles, or I was not very interested in the Beatles until I first read 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not terribly interested in 60s culture and sort of, relitigating, revisiting how interesting what happened to the boomers was. And I love this book so much. I've become a Beatles fan. I realize it's not very original to become a Beatles fan in 2020, but I've become a Beatles fan because of 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it makes them so alive. It makes them so interesting. Knowing all this backstory made them so fun to me. I would recommend this book especially to people who think they do not like the Beatles.
I think there's something very moving in it about the way it unpacks the relationship between the 4 Beatles and Brian Epstein. There's something that happens quite late on in the book. I don't want to spoil it for people that haven't read it yet, but it just gave me goosebumps the first time I read it in a way that's quite difficult with non-fiction. But Craig Brown does something very clever where he plays around with the chronology right at the end. And it's as if you are seeing the Beatles, these 4 young men, for the very first time through Brian Epstein's eyes, just before they become the Beatles. And it gives you this quite peculiar series of emotions, and there's a kind of magic to it on the page.
Well, Craig Brown is a comic writer, and though he's only he's only recently started writing kind of extended works of non-fiction, really, in the last sort of, well, certainly, less than 10 years, really. So I think people think he's a parodist, he's a kind of comic columnist and a satirist. I mean, it's certainly a very enjoyable book, and it has lots of comic components, and Craig Brown has a very light touch in both senses. He doesn't, the historical materials are accommodated in a very pleasing way, and also he sees the light side of things. But I think one of the reasons why it's such a unignorable book, really, is that you can't say, is it a comic book? Is it a piece of cultural history? Comic non-fiction usually doesn't take the form of long cultural history. So in that sense, it's a border-breaking book.
We did have an amazing shortlist, that's undoubtedly the case. But we all came spontaneously, individually, to the decision that Craig Brown had to win. And I think it's because of his originality. I think too often books that are funny aren't taken seriously, as if there can't be a profundity in them as well as the humour. And that's the joy of Craig Brown's achievement, is that he does make us laugh, but he makes us think very seriously about the nature of fame.
Thank you to the judges for that eloquent summary of all their careful thinking. Thanks once again to Baillie Gifford and the Blavatnik Family Foundation for their continuing support. And congratulations, of course, to our winner this year, Craig Brown, with 1, 2, 3, 4, The Beatles in Time. And finally, good night.